So unfortunately for me, there's a $15 deck that I've been working on that had a random price bump. And not by like a few cents. One of the cards went from under $1 to $3, and I don't know why. If you can explain to me why Bladewing Deathless Tyrant has now become a $2.50 card, then I can figure out what the hell went wrong here. But till then, this is a $15 deck that just has a tiny asterisk in it because the Magic the Gathering market is a fickle bitch. That all said, I really wanted to make this commander work for the longest time. Ever since this commander was released, I desperately wanted to make him work because he's just so damn cool. An 8 mana 9/9 with trample that gives you a token and a reanimate. It's just so hard to make him work because he only operates when you cast him, and an 8 mana reanimate is not good. So we have to make the most use of that 8 mana. Well, let's go ahead and talk about how we're gonna do that. Sauron, the Lord of the Rings, is a Grixis and 5 whopping 8 mana beast of a commander. Whenever we cast the spell, we get to amass Orcs 5, which means we create a token that's 0/0 and give it 5/1/1 counters. Then we mill 5 cards. Then we return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. And then our opponents have to contend with a 9/9 Trampler. And oh boy, that ring tempt ability at the end there, we're not really going to make much use of, but it's there in case you want to do some stuff with that. Now again, when I first got this commander, I really wanted to know what the hell Wizards of the Coast were thinking, because this commander is not enough for 8 mana. Like, this is not enough of an effect for 8 mana. And then I realized, no. I'm thinking about this all the wrong way. We need to treat Sauron like a final boss. This is a thing that comes down and creates a board state that must be answered immediately. That means it's on us as players to create a board state that Sauron would be proud of. And we are going to do this by playing a fun little strategy called Oops, All Lieutenants. Every single creature here is something that must be answered by our opponents. If they are not answered in a timely fashion, our opponents will die, or their board states will be ravaged. Every card here needs to either create a massively powerful board state, or needs to be such a powerful card in and of itself that it is able to threaten a game loss, or can sacrifice our opponent's stuff so that they run out of resources. So let's go ahead and begin with the card that made this deck end up being an $18 deck instead of a $15 deck for reasons, I guess. This is Bladewing Deathless Tyrant. Whenever this deals combat damage to a player, we get to spawn a 2/2 black zombie knight creature token with menace for every creature in our grave. Since our commander lets us mill 5 cards, we have a little bit of mill in the deck, and we plan on throwing our resources to the grave for reanimation. Bladewing should be able to spawn anywhere between 2 to 5 tokens consistently, which is definitely enough when you consider that he's got haste. We're going to pull him out of the grave instantly, and then our board state will be Sauron, Bladewing, a 5/5 orc, and then 2 to 5 2/2 zombies. That's an instant board state as soon as we cast our commander on an empty board. Then we have Drakaseth, Maw of Flames. Whenever this card attacks, we deal 4 damage to one target, and then 3 damage to up to 2 other targets. This is almost a board wipe to most board states, and we are going to be using this to repeatedly pressure people over the game. This should allow us to slowly eat away at other people's boards, and if Drakaseth isn't dealt with, we will have command over the board. We can also make our opponents sacrifice multiple cards over and over again with the attack triggers of Thraxamundar and Shard of the Void Dragon. Both of these creatures, whenever they attack, will force our opponents to sack some cards. Then we have Scourge of the Throne, a flying dragon with dethrone, and whenever this card attacks for the first time each turn, if the player we're attacking has the most life or is tied for the most life, we will then get an extra combat phase. This means if we have something like Shard of the Void Dragon or the previously mentioned Thraxamundar, we are getting extra versions of these abilities over and over and over, or an extra cast off of Atali Primal Storm. Whenever this card attacks, exile the top card of every player's library and then cast any of those cards from the top. Now, I mentioned Bladewing Deathless Tyrant and his ability to spawn lots and lots of tokens for us. So let's go ahead and make use of those tokens with Brutaclad Telcor Engineer. All of our creature tokens have haste, and at the beginning of combat on each of our turns, we make a 2/1 Phyrexian Mirror Artifact creature. Then we can choose a token we control, and all of our other tokens become a copy of that token. There's plenty of ways to make use of Brutaclad. Use him to turn all of our creature tokens into treasures for massive turns. Use him to turn all of our mirrors into the menacing zombies, or blow up any token you could think of that we make. We can go ahead and have Brutaclad make just oodles and oodles of copies of. Like, say, the goblins that come out of Okiva Enigma Goliath. This flying and ward 3 lieutenant has the ability of, whenever we cast a non-creature spell, of which our deck is mostly comprised of, we make X 1/1 red goblin Phyrexian tokens, where X is the mana value of that spell, and they gain haste. If this card is left on the board for more than a couple turns, our board becomes massive, and those little 1/1 goblins, thanks to Brutaclad, can be changed into stronger tokens of other varieties. Say, the tokens that the Dalek Emperor creates, the 3/3 black Daleks that have Menace. These are way more threatening than the 1/1 goblins, and if we have them, Brutaclad will convert them into what we need. The Dalek Emperor makes everybody face a villainous choice, where they either sacrifice a creature they control, remember, creatures that we are constantly going to be ravaging with our other attack triggers, or they let us make one of these Daleks, and if we have just one of these Daleks, we can use Brutaclad to then see to it that we have multiple Daleks. Or let's say that Menace isn't what we need to go for, and Flying is what we need to go for instead. Then we would then transform everything into the tokens made by Una, Queen of the Fae. We choose a color and make an opponent exile the top X cards of their library. For every card exiled this way that is of the color we choose, we make a 1/1 blue and black fairy creature with Flying. Being able to transform all of Bladewing's Menace tokens into these flying tokens, or vice versa, depending on the situation, is why all of these myriad token strategies are being supplemented by Brutaclad himself. Finally, for tokens, we also have Screeching Scorchbeast. Whenever this attacks, every player gets 2 rad counters, and whenever one or more non-land permanents are milled, remember, we mill cards too, we make that many black zombie mutant creature tokens, only once each turn. So if our commander comes onto the board and mills 4 non-land cards, then suddenly we are going to get 4 black zombies. The Screeching Scorchbeast, having the ability to increase rad counters on people every time he attacks, does make him a threat that needs to be dealt with very quickly, but with Flying and Menace, he can evade almost every problematic situation, and he is yet another way to spawn tokens. We also have Arvinox the Mind Flail, an enchantment creature that gets to be in your graveyard as a creature, and then gets to be safe as an enchantment on the board. At the beginning of your end step, we can exile the bottom card from every opponent's library face down. For as long as those cards are exiled, we can look at them and cast any permanent spells from among them and spend mana of any color for it. We are a big mana deck at the end of the day, so we should have plenty of mana to spend casting all of our opponent's stuff. And by the time we can animate Arvinox, he'll be a 9/9 swinging alongside our 9/9 commander. Then we have Abaddon the Despoiler, a Grixis 5/5 commander in his own right, who says, during our turn, any spell we cast from our hand with mana value X or less gains Cascade, where X is the amount of life our opponents have lost this turn. We are a big creature deck, so we can make people lose big chunky amounts of life, making our giant spells be able to double up in value for us. Then we have Karavek the Merciless. Anytime an opponent casts a spell, Karavek will deal damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. Karavek on the board spells doom for almost any opponent if he sticks out for more than a couple turns. Then we have more ways to revive creatures in our grave over and above what our commander is doing. Victimize will allow us to make use of all the creature tokens we have to revive 2 creatures from the grave at once, and Dread Return can revive a creature from the grave once and also do it again with Flashback by sacrificing 3 of the tokens that we've been creating. All in all, this should give us enough oomph and enough ability to keep bringing stuff back out of the grave to threaten our opponents. But remember, when our commander touches the board, we need ways to make sure he's threatening immediately. So to make sure that happens, we've got 3 cards that are haste enablers, one of which gets to sit in our graveyard. Rising of the Day gives all of our legendary creatures 1/0, so our commander gets to swing for 10, and gives all of our creatures haste. Vashino Lashclaw can give a single creature haste by discarding a card, which also will put a creature in the grave for our commander. And Garna the Bloodflame can be both a recursion piece and also a haste enabler, giving us access to all creatures that have been thrown into the graveyard by our opponents at any point, and also giving all of our creatures haste as long as she is on the board. All in all, these are the core of the strategy we're going to be going with Sauron. Get any of these lieutenants on the board and start threatening game-ending consequences. But we also need to make sure that we're able to see any of those cards. So let's talk about our draw package. I wanted to go ahead and build a draw base that focused a lot on discarding cards. So every single card we have that draws either works from the grave or throws things in the grave for itself. Let's begin with Deep Analysis. For 4 mana, target player draws 2 cards, but for 2 mana from the grave, we can make a player draw 2 cards again. This has myriad uses, since we can just discard it out of our hand with one of our cards, or mill it on accident with our commander and still get use of it. Then we have the trio of Fact or Fiction, Hostile Negotiations, and Sauron's Ransom. Each of these are effectively the same card, giving our opponent a choice between multiple cards and sending some of those cards to the grave and some of them to our hand. Sauron's Ransom gives them a choice between 4 cards, Fact or Fiction gives them a choice between 5, and Hostile Negotiations lets them choose between 6, with 3 of them being unknown. Each of these cards is fantastic in letting us dig through our deck very, very quickly. Collector's Vault lets us draw and discard while also creating treasure tokens every time we discard cards. And Matsulandi the Great Door gives us access to even more looting with its draw and discard ability, and if we've got enough permanents in the grave, then it can become a big mana piece for us later. Speaking of draw discard, we also have Moira Scavenger with Death Touch and Haste and the ability to amass orcs for us if we need it to. Also, it lets us discard and draw, which is the most important thing that we can do. And then finally, for our draw package, we have Faithless Looting to draw, discard, and have flashback, Seize the Spoils to draw, discard, and make a treasure token, Big Score and Pirate's Pillage to draw, discard, and create 2 treasure tokens, respectively. This should allow us to cast our big mana spells easier and also get our reanimation targets in the grave at optimal speed. But we also need to make sure our opponents aren't able to win the game, so let's go ahead and blow up everything they hold dear. Now, while several of our lieutenants have the ability to stop our opponents from winning by sacrificing multiples of their permanents, we need more ways of making that happen. So let's begin with Maestro's Charm, a Grixis instant spell that lets us either look at the top 5 of our library, put one of them to our hand, and the rest in the graveyard, fueling our commander's ability, make each opponent lose 3 life and we gain 3 life, potentially doming somebody for game, or dealing 5 damage to a creature or planeswalker. Modal spells like this have so many different ways we can use them, it is fantastic. Voracious Fellbeast makes every opponent sacrifice a creature when he touches the board, and Vile Mutilator makes every opponent sacrifice a creature and an enchantment when he touches the board. Card's insane. Then we have Negate to block any problematic removal spells, and Saruman's Trickery to block even more of them while also giving us access to amass orcs. I like it for the thematic touch. Not the best counterspell we could have picked, but definitely fits the theme perfectly. Hostage Taker can yank away a creature from an opponent and also allows us to cast that creature whenever we want. Soul Manipulation's another counterspell that also has the ability to recur creatures from our graveyard to our hand. Feed the Swarm can blow up a creature or an artifact. Rampaging War Mammoth can blow up any number of artifacts while also being a reanimation target. Rakdos Charm either exiles a graveyard, blows up an artifact, or makes a token player cry. And Bedevil can blow up an artifact creature or a planeswalker. Each and every one of these cards is serving multiple purposes in our deck, but we are not done. We also need to recognize that our deck is going to be the problematic endgame thing for all of our opponents to deal with. We are going to end up as a late-game arch-enemy commander. So we need a lot of board wipes to keep our opponents at bay. So we're going to be running 4 of those board wipes, first of them being Subjugate the Hobbits. For 7 mana, we gain control of every non-commander creature with mana value 3 or less. We can turn the token player's entire strategy into our own this way. Then we have Languish to make all creatures get -4/-4 until end of turn. This is almost an asymmetric board wipe, since most of our creatures tend to be big enough to not worry about this. Too Greedily Too Deep can grab any creature from our grave and put it on the battlefield, and then burn every other creature for however much power that creature had. And then Decree of Pain can blow up all creatures, and they can't be regenerated. And we get to draw a card for every creature destroyed this way. And since we don't have any way to have a no maximum hand size, Decree of Pain will let us discard any cards we need afterwards in order to fuel our commander's ability. All in all, this amount of disruption should allow us to stay in the game for a very long time, since we're almost running like 20 removal spells between our lieutenants and our removal kit and our board wipe kit. But we're not done. We are a big mana deck, so we need ways to cast all of our cards. Let's go ahead and talk about the myriad ways we're going to do that. A 16-card ramp package may seem like overkill, but if you have played this deck, you understand why it is necessary. Let's begin with the trio of Fire Diamond, Charcoal Diamond, and Sky Diamond, a budget player's wet dream of affordable mana rocks. Command Sphere is also here, as we can use it to draw cards later on in the game when we need to. Same with Hedron Archive, that gives us access to 2 mana and a draw spell if we need it. Warren Power Stone is finally under 20 cents, so we can run it in more budget decks. Gives us access to 2 mana whenever we want. Dreamstone Hedron is the big brother of Hedron Archive, giving us 3 mana and letting us sacrifice it to draw 3 cards. Stone Speaker Crystal is the power-crept version of Hedron Archive, in that it has the same ability, but for losing one of the card draw, we can exile any number of players' graveyards, meaning we get to be the only reanimation player on the block. Mind Stone is a slightly weaker but more castable command sphere. We can get a mana and draw a card later in the game when we need to. Wayfarer's Bauble can get any basic land from our deck onto the battlefield. Everflowing Chalice can be a 2-mana rock or any other size of mana rock as we need later in the game. Izzet Signet, Rakdos Signet, Dimir Signet, and Arcane Signet give us access to all of our colors at 2 mana. And the more signets we get reprinted, the easier it is to include them in budget decks, so thank you, Wizards of the Coast. And finally, we have Treasure Nabber, which says anytime an opponent taps an artifact for mana, we steal that card temporarily. I've seen this card generate like 10 mana in a turn if there's any non-green decks at a table, so this thing is fantastic in our deck. It also gets really funny when there's 2 players with Treasure Nabbers in the game. Then the players without Treasure Nabbers never actually get their mana rocks. It's a really funny interaction. You should definitely give it a try. That said, we do need to get to the land base, and we are running an equal amount of 6 islands, 6 mountains, and 6 swamps. As for our dual lands, we are running a River of Tears, Darkwater Catacomb, Shadowblood Ridge, Foreboding Ruins, Tainted Peak, Choked Estuary, Tainted Isle, Frostboil Snarl, Smoldering Marsh, Sunken Hollow, and Ferris Lake. This gives us all of the filtered lands we can, 1 tricky land, a few of our check reveal lands, and the tainted lands. These are all incredibly good budget grabs if you are trying to find out how to make your decks more consistent with less money. Also, 2 Tango lands is always going to be helpful in any deck build. After that, we have the fetching lands of Seething Landscape. Oh my god, I still love these things. I'm so happy we have these Evolving Wilds power creeps. Well, they're adjacent technically, but they're still fucking fantastic. Then we have Promising Vein and Shire Terrace. These get to act as mana the turn you drop them down, or mana fixing later if you need them to. Myriad Landscape acts as a way to ramp, and Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse gives us access to even more ways to get basic lands out of our deck. Finally, our Omni and our utility lands. Exotic Orchard and Command Tower are our Omni lands, and our utility land is Pit of Offerings, since the Pit of Offerings can be used to yank cards away from anybody's graveyard if necessary, which is our 3rd way of fucking with other Reanimator players. Only we get to be Reanimator players. Let's talk about how to be a Reanimator player. So let's talk about keepable hands. We want a hand that can accelerate quite a bit, and we want some draw spells and some interaction. Creatures will end up coming into the graveyard when they do, so it's not really the worst thing in the world if we don't have them right now. But looking at our hand, we have a very keepable hand. Pit of Offerings and Darkwater Catacombs is not the greatest land start, but the Darkwater Catacombs actively allowing us to filter the colorless mana of Pit of Offerings works out. Worn Powerstone as a 3-mana rock, giving us access to 2 mana, is amazing, and a Sky Diamond to play on turn 2 is also fantastic. We can reset our opponent's board states with Decree of Pain, and we've got a Rakdos Charm and a Bedevil to take care of any other problems. So this, I would say, is a keepable hand. We draw our opening card, and we play that tap Pit of Offerings. Unfortunate that we have to play it this early, but this is why we run filter lands. Next turn comes around, and we can play Darkwater Catacombs and pay 2 to get that Sky Diamond online. Next turn comes around, and we have a Dimir Signet in hand. We've missed a land drop, but it's not the worst thing in the world. We can play that Worn Power Stone and make up for the missed land drop with the mana acceleration of the Power Stone. Turn 4 comes around, and we get to play an island. Now we have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 mana. So in this situation, I think the best thing to do is get Dimir Signet online and dig for black mana. So we are going to pay 4, and we are going to Factor Fiction at the end of our opponent's turns. This is going to let us reveal the top 5 of our deck, and our opponents are going to be able to pick how these cards end up in our hand. And really, any combination of these is going to be fine for us. Let's assume that we get the worst case scenario and we get just this Ferris Lake and this island, and everything else goes into the grave. We don't want Scourge in the grave right now, but we also want to make sure that we have access to our lands, since our goal on turn 5 is going to be resetting all of the other players. We're going to play the Ferris Lake, and we have access to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 mana. Tapping all of the mana is going to allow us to Decree of Pain and reset everybody's board states. Their commanders are gone, and whatever boards they've built are gone. At turn 5, most players have 2 to 3 creatures. So let's go ahead and assume that player 1 has 2, player 2 has 2, player 3 has 2 as well, as a low end. This gives us a very, very thick hand, so we need to go ahead and discard down plenty of these cards. And we want to make sure one of these creatures makes it into the graveyard so Sauron can reanimate it. Throwing all that away, we move to turn 6. We have the ability to play Sauron now, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Tapping all of our available mana except for 1, ideally our Sunken Hollow, since it does give us access to blue, and that psychological damage is important when dealing with your opponents. We're going to get Sauron on the board, and let's go ahead and look at what's in our grave. We have Drakaseth and we have Scourge of the Throne. But wait, we have a mill ability. We get to mill 5 cards thanks to our commander. So looking at what's in our grave, we had access instead to Okiva. Now, here's where I have to ask a question. Do you think that it's likely our opponents have built board states enough in the single turn that Drakaseth is necessary? Or can we use Okiva to start setting our opponents back quite a bit? I think, actually, the Drakaseth could be the Okiva instead. We don't necessarily need the repeated removal right now. We could probably go ahead and go with Okiva. We move on to turn 7, and it's time for us to start casting some spells, now that we have access to all kinds of free stuff. So we're going to pay 2 for the Worn Power Stone to get Collector's Vault on the board. That was a non-creature spell, so we're going to go ahead and make 2 Phyrexian Goblins. Then we're going to tap Dimir Signet and Sunken Hollow for Rakdos Signet, making 2 more Phyrexian Goblins. Let's go ahead and remove one of our opponent's problematic cards off the board by casting, say, the Rakdos Charm or Bedevil. Looking at our mana, we have the ability to get Ferris Lake filtered, and Collector's Vault's going to be necessary to do that. We're going to make a treasure token, drawing a card, and sacrificing the Vile Mutilator from here in order to cast the Bedevil and get rid of a problematic card. That will spawn 3 more Phyrexian Goblins. So our board has these lovely goblin creature tokens. They have haste until end of turn, and we can go ahead and smack somebody very, very hard with them. Rakdos Signets here, we maybe didn't need to filter our mana as hard as we did. We might have been able to hold up mana for a negate, but that's not super important when we're just playtesting. We swing out with everything, making an opponent take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7... plus the 5 is 12, plus Okiva is 18, plus our commander is 25 damage. Then we move on to turn 8, which would usually be our penultimate turn during any given game. Let's go ahead and organize our board a little bit easier so it's better to see what we have access to. And looking at where we are at, we have a couple of options. We can play Shard of the Night Dragon right now, and whenever this attacks, each opponent will lose one of their permanents. I think that's already a fantastic start to what we want to do, but looking at where we're at, maybe we can get away with some other stuff. Let's tap our Collector's Vault, and let's see what we draw and discard. We've got Rampaging War Mammoth. We don't really need to worry about that right now, so we're going to discard that Shard of the Void Dragon so we have access to it with our commander later. If our opponents have any artifacts on the board, we can cycle Rampaging War Mammoth to get rid of them. Otherwise, I think holding up the counterspells of Saruman's Trickery and Negate are the right things to do, allowing us to use Rakdos Charm to get rid of a problematic card or burn our opponents for a lot of damage. This will, of course, spawn 2 more tokens with Akiva coming down on the board. Notice we're not winning with our commander so much as we're winning with the lieutenant our commander brought out of the graveyard. And we are only playing this deck because it is a grab bag of commanders. So, we swing with everything for 27 damage, and if our opponents try to do anything, even a fog, we are going to negate that card. And if they follow up with another card, we are going to use Saruman's Trickery to stop that card as well. Throwing those to the grave, amassing our token by 1 more power, and of course spawning 5 more tokens for Akiva. Each and every one of these tokens has haste, but they can't swing on this turn as we've swung with all of the other tokens. At this point, we've eliminated 1 player out of the game for sure, leading us to turn 9 with Treasure Nabber. So there's one of 2 scenarios here. Either our opponent is dead, or either our opponent has killed Sauron and we have to reanimate Sauron, thereby reanimating another card out of our grave, or we've been board wiped. But let's go ahead and say we get board wiped. That's probably the fairest thing that's going to happen to us. This means if we pay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 with this island on the board, we will cast Sauron again, milling 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards from our grave, and then we get to grab any new card from our graveyard. At this point, the most oppressive cards we could pick are Drakaseth and Shard of the Void Dragon, as they both make our opponent sacrifice cards or get rid of creatures. So if you're dealing with decks that don't have a ton of creatures, grab Shard of the Void Dragon to make them sacrifice artifacts and enchantments and planeswalkers. If they have high creature count decks, grab Drakaseth in this situation to make sure that you are able to snipe the problematic creatures. We're going to go with Shard of the Void Dragon here, and that allows us to add a few tokens onto the board. This Orc army comes out with 5 power. I said a few tokens, I meant a token with a few bits of power, not the same thing. So our board state after a board wipe and after using countless counterspells is still this, which is a fantastic board state. Also note there were treasures created from Collector's Vault that I just forgot to put on the board, so we technically have access to more mana than what we used. Next turn comes up, it's turn 10, and we can go ahead and attack a player for what's probably going to be game at this point. We've eliminated 1 player with a massive board state, and now we are dealing chip damage to deal with the final players. We can also go ahead and get rid of all artifacts on the board by spending a ton of mana into the Raging War Mammoth cycle ability. This will lower the amount of non-land permanents our opponents have, so Shard of the Void Dragon has stronger targets. Get rid of all their mana rocks, and now the only things they have left are the juicy cards. This should put us in a very, very powerful position. And I know this is much slower than a deck normally would be that I play, but the entire idea is to have a slow-going deck that only interacts a little bit until it's time to play your commander and let your lieutenants do almost all of the talking. Very final video game bossy. That's kind of the idea that I wanted to go for here. But what if you had a little more money? This is one of those commanders that really benefits from having some extra dough. So let's talk about some of the most lethal lieutenants you could add in if you had a bit of extra cash. If you're upgrading this deck, make sure that every single card you add in is going to be some kind of lieutenant that is insanely powerful. Obviously, adding a Soul Ring to this deck and adding in things like Gilded Lotus for even better mana is an option, but I want to talk about the most powerful cards you can reanimate from a graveyard that set people back insanely hard. I need to talk about the Phyrexian Praetors. Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur makes everybody lose their draws. They sacrifice their entire hands unless they have Reliquary Tower. Shieldred Whispering One can make people lose all of their resources constantly on the battlefield while constantly reanimating your own. Jin-Gitaxias Progress Tyrant can counter any spells that are cast that are artifacts or planeswalkers or not planeswalkers, instant sorceries and artifacts he can counter, while also cloning up your own. Urabrask Heretic Praetor gives you access to more draw spells. Then we have Urabrask the Hidden, who's another way to get haste on your board. Then we have Sheoldred, who can make everybody sacrifice cards when she comes out, and also has a hugely powerful backside of letting you put all creatures from all graveyards in battlefield under your control. And then, of course, Sheoldred the Apocalypse. Whenever you draw a card, you can gain 2 life, and anytime your opponents draw a card, they lose 2 life. Remember, you don't need these cards to be individually powerful because of some synergy. They just need to be something that threatens your opponent so hard they must get rid of them. And this definitely fits the bill. You also can add in extra pieces like Cavern Horde Dragon for more ramp, or Archon of Cruelty for one of the best repeatable ways to set a player back in all of Magic the Gathering. Also, if you are going with Reanimation, maybe go ahead and add each of the Primordials in. Diluvian Primordial, Sepulchre Primordial, and Molten Primordial. They each steal a resource from your opponent for an amount of time and can cause all kinds of mayhem as a result. Olivia Crimson Bride gives you access to even more Reanimation, and Sauron the Dark Lord. You can put the 6-mana Sauron in the 99 because reanimating it makes your opponents cower in fear. You've made a 5/5 Orc army already, and anytime they cast a spell, you're going to make that Orc army even bigger on top of that. And if the ring tempts you, then you get to discard your hand and draw more. The technically more powerful Sauron going in the 99 is a perfectly viable strategy. Then you also can add in Withering Torment as a better way of blowing up enchantments, and Anger, since getting this in the grave will benefit you greatly in any game. All of these cards can do a world of hurt to your opponents, and I think that's the way you have to play this commander. If you do not play this commander with very powerful reanimation targets, and not the standard ones that I like, even Meteor Golem, who I love a lot, is not a strong enough reanimation target for this. I think having nothing but lieutenants and giant tempo swings is the way to go to make Sauron work for you. But what do you think? Let me know what you would do with this deck in the comments section below. I want to know how y'all would be building this commander, because I think I'm going to be building him in paper again. I took him apart ages ago, and I think it's about time to go ahead and rebuild the final boss of Grixis commanders. That all said, let me know what you think in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and if you have not done so, maybe consider checking out my Patreon and supporting me there. I'm not saying you should. Mostly everything I do there is just talk about what's going on in real life, which may or may not be your cup of tea, but that all said, thank you for watching my videos. Thank you for being here. I appreciate every single one of you, and I hope to see you in the next one. Insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravelern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Agamotto, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.